Hi, I'm back again this week and with a new video. As you can see, I have a new webcam. Um, I also have, a new regular camera I will be shooting with to do other types of vlogs. I should make an update. Just to, have to pardon why I haven't been as active lately. There have been some medical issues and a lot of animals giving birth out here, so I've been quite busy and have not been able to have the time to really shoot. So I apologize, but hopefully things will start getting back to normal a little bit, over the next couple of weeks, and I'll be able to resume shooting and get where I can shoot normal and finally launch the show. Anyway, as you can tell by the title, today I'm going to talk about why I support Bernie Sanders, why I am voting for him. Know that I am in California. I have not had the opportunity to vote yet on this particular election in the primaries. So, this is March 15th right now. There are other states voting today. But, given the climate, I think I should talk about why I'm doing it. And understand, I respect your right to be able to vote for whomever it is you want to vote for. You may have very good, legitimate reasons behind that, and I respect it. But these are just about my reasons for why I am wanting to vote the way I want to vote. And you can share your reasons behind. I would ask, please try to keep things respectful. I'm not trying to create enemies with anybody, be conservative, independent, Democrat, liberal, whatever party you belong to, however you feel on the issues. You have the right to feel the way you do. That's okay. Now, obviously there are some people who I won't get along with, just like if you're part of the Klan, probably not going to get along with you too well. But other than that, I think most people are actually pretty cool, and hopefully we can find common ground on things. But anyway, here are my 12 main reasons for why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. 1. He's for ending tax dodging companies sending jobs overseas. And we all know what a disaster, NAFTA has been, the TPP, normalizing relations with China. The biggest part of that was done by Reagan, unfortunately, and that was getting rid of the tariffs. Once you got rid of the tax on imports from overseas, imports became cheaper than American goods. And once that happened, you saw that, and combined with these trade deals to eliminate a lot of American jobs. This is what made it cheaper for companies to sit here and go overseas to hire slave labor. Because before, the tariffs, when they were in place, you could sit, if you imported something from China, it was just as expensive because of the tariff taxes that were in place. They allowed it to basically be the same price, and all things being equal, who are you going to support? The Chinese good or the American good? Well, America used to speak and say, we support the American good, probably about 7 to 8 times out of 10. But that was the big cause of it. You get rid of the tariffs, then you make these trade deals, and for corporations it worked. For the American people it didn't. And that's a big reason why I support Bernie. The next reason, he's for universal health care. And look, I support the right of doctors and nurses to be paid very, very well. I just don't think I don't think medicine should be about how much profit can I make. I know that profit can sometimes be a powerful motivator for innovation, but in the cases where it is becoming an issue of you're seeing people get sick and die in the streets because we've lost our humanity about it, that to me is not okay. And too often that's exactly what's happening. And I'm just not for that kind of thing, those kind of abuses. When you see hospital say, oh, well, this homeless person, they're not worth my time because they can't afford to pay me. That's a loss of humanity. That's not right, that's not cool, and it's not okay, and it shouldn't be to anybody. Because it's not moral, it's not right, and it's not okay to take another human being who needs your help and say, well, you can't pay, so now I'm going to throw you out. Screw whether or not you live or die. Doctors have an oath about doing no harm. They need to live up to that. And every other industrialized nation in the world, and even many that aren't, have universal health care. Because health care, the right to see a doctor, belongs to everybody. The right of an insurance company to make profit off of that, saying, oh, well, here, we'll cover part of that bill, but you got to pay us a ton of money. Frankly, I'd rather see, $3,000 a year go into taxes than pay $9,000 a year, to a healthcare company. And know that, my next door neighbor, if his kid's got a seizure problem, his kid's going to get the help that they need. Yes, maybe on some things you have to wait longer. It's a fair point to make, but we have a larger population, we have more doctors, we have more nurses, and we can invest more in education, and then it creates more people willing to go into the profession. You give the power to the people will make the right decisions. But if you discourage the education, if you discourage the health care in the first place, where's the motivation to go into the field? That's why I'm for it. And another leads to my next reason. Bernie also supports for the right of the USA to be a much higher educated society. So we do have more doctors and nurses. So even for those people who are working fast food jobs, they can do the work smarter, more efficient, better, and feel better about the things they know and can do. If that's where they're starting out life, or even if that's where they're making extra money as a retiree, or even if it's the only thing they are qualified to do because that factory moved to China and no place within 50 miles of them will hire them other than the fast food company, which does happen. And I am for everybody having a right to a very high education. And look, I know college isn't for everyone, but even if you don't go to college, that doesn't mean a good trade school where you can learn to be a culinary arts and become a chef, or where you can learn mechanics, become a mechanic. These schools like this need to be able to thrive too, and I support the education to come from those systems so that you can be the person you want to be. And that's the point. I want people to have that opportunity. You know, I am the next reason, he's for ending the for-profit prison complex. And I know a lot of people don't know a lot about this issue, though it is coming to light a lot more in recent years. It is very simple. In the early 80s, especially in the early 80s, but it even started in the 60s as a backlash by rich white supremacists who did not like seeing Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and other civil rights leaders leading all of these things to try and get people equal rights. So they came up with, and it took them a long time to come up with a plan for a backlash to basically make a new form of institutionalized slavery, and that was for-profit prisons. And for-profit prisons are nothing more than a cancer. It's saying, hey, look, we know you screwed up and you were drinking and driving, and you deserve to be punished. You broke the law. But now I get to sit here and have this other person make a profit off of you while you're in prison. And then for the next 2 to 5 years after you're out of prison, because you're paying fines, legal fees, restitution, whatever it is you need to pay, you're paying for that once you get out on top of it. But now you think, well, doesn't most of that go to the state? In most cases. But there's a part of it that ends up in a rich man's pocket instead of in the state, where it could be helping to improve the prison, standards so that they have better access to health care. They have better access to education. They have better access to counseling. The things that are supposed to be about rehabilitation, which is supposed to be what our criminal justice system is supposed to do, right? So instead of it getting into it, the idea is spend as little money as possible, so they eat the shittiest possible food, so that they eat, so that they have horrible health care, and I know you're saying, people are saying, yeah, but I mean, we got to punish evil, right? Well, to a point, yes. But if you don't teach them the right and wrong, what they've done wrong, then all you're doing is caging them like animals and turning them into said thing. Because eventually what happens to somebody in a cage? They lose their mind. They lose their humanity. This has been proven through psychological studies of inmates, especially ones who've been in solitary confinement, because often they will be in solitary for 3, 4, 5 days, sometimes 2, 3, 4 weeks before being let out. There have been some extreme cases where it's been 3 or 4 months. Now, anybody trapped in a little windowless room with nothing but a mat on the floor and a toilet, and all you see is a little flap open and a meal come to you 3 times a day. You have no communication with anybody. It's going to drive anybody into insanity. It's going to drive anyone insane. It's just the truth. And it's part of the thing, I mean, we have to find a better balance, of how we treat, because, you have to understand, 85% of prisoners are going to get out someday. 85% still have to get out and resume their lives someday. They have to be able to be functioning members of society. And if you've driven them insane through crazy practices, how are they supposed to function? You can't ask somebody to all of a sudden be like, oh, hey, I'm a functioning member of society. If they've been driven to a place of insanity for years. Another reason I am for Bernie Sanders. He is for reinvesting in our country by rebuilding and repairing our infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the schools, hospitals, the dams, the airports, our fire stations, our police stations, our prisons, our libraries, and even our national parks, even our state and local parks. All of these things, it takes money to keep them going. It takes money to keep them in good shape. But the thing is, right now, we're not spending the money to keep those things in good shape, and a lot of them are falling apart because of it. Our bridges, they start collapsing, you're going to see a lot of people dying. A few years ago, there was the one in Minnesota that just collapsed. Everybody remembers that tragedy. There were people who died because of that collapse. This is what happens to bridges if you don't repair them. And I know the cost can seem overwhelming when, most of us are lucky to have $1 or $2 in our wallets. When somebody tells you, oh, it's going to cost you $3 billion to fix this thing, that can feel a little overwhelming. Like, I get it. For the average person like me, it's a sticker shock. But but collectively as a nation, we can afford to do it. We can afford to do it. When we can spend 57% of our national budget on the military, which is ridiculous, and we're not spending it on the soldiers, mind you. Only about 7% of that total gets spent on the soldiers. Most of the rest of it's going to military contractors so they can build more missiles and bombs. And it's not that I'm against missiles and bombs, but you only need so damn many. There's so many of them right now stocked up. They've got a whole stretch of Nevada desert that's quite literally just a big pile of tanks, planes, missiles, bombs, all just stocked up and going to shit, sitting in a desert, in the middle of the desert. Just a whole, it's military controlled, so you're not going to get in there and steal it, but, no one's using it. Why? Because you can only build so damn many. But because they have all these contracts, it's just creating a chaos. And it just doesn't make sense. So I am for redistributing it so that more of the troops get this money, so that the VA system is properly funded, so that they're getting more counseling for PTSD. And I am for taking some of this, and I am for paying, yes, down some of the debts that this country's incurred, but I am also for using a big chunk of that and reinvesting in our country. All we have to do is figure out our priorities, and we can sit here and have the nice things we really deserve in this country. The next reason, he voted against the Iraq War. And understand, Afghanistan and going after bin Laden, I have no issue whatsoever with it. He deserved to be dealt with after what he did on 9/11. And that's a point of contention I have no problem with. No problem with it. Bernie has no problem with it. Let me make that very clear. But Iraq was a huge, huge mistake. And was one of the dumbest things we ever did. And I'm not going to get into all of the reasons why I feel that way, but I know I stand with him on the issue. The next reason, he has been for my community, the LGBTQIA+ community, right, for us to have equal rights since the 1970s. When he discovered the issue, he came out and for it. Whether as mayor in Burlington, he was for it. As a member of the House, he was for it. As a member of the Senate, he's been for it. As a presidential candidate, he's been for it. His entire career, his entire life, he's been for helping others, for changing things so that people have equality. I stand by that. He's been, and that goes to the larger point that he's been helping all minority communities since the civil rights movement. There have been plenty of pictures of him coming out showing that he was there for the Million Man March, that he was there for on the bridge on the road to Selma, that he was, caught protesting. He was arrested in Chicago because he was protesting housing conditions and the lack thereof given to African Americans at the time. Because they weren't giving people fair and equal access to housing. So I appreciate that kind of legacy that that his whole life he's been willing to fight. He's been wanting to make things better, to change things for the better for people, and that's something I stand by tremendously. Next thing, he's for transitioning away from the fossil fuels and finding sustainable energy. Solar, wind, hydroelectric, thorium, all of these things, Bernie Sanders is for it. If you can find clean forms of nuclear energy, like with thorium, if you can find wind and solar and hydroelectric, and use it where it's appropriate, it could contribute to a big issue of getting us away from very, very unsustainable electrical issues. Our electricity cannot continue this way. And forever. It just can't. We have to transition into new ideas and new ways of doing it. And I understand it's hard because a lot of people think, oh, well, you're trying to take away my job. I work in the coal mines, or you're taking away. You're not understanding. What we're saying is we're not going to have you do these dirty, dangerous jobs anymore. Instead, you'll make solar panels, wind turbines. Your kids won't have to get black lung. If you work in a coal mine now, you know full well black lung is a real possibility. And I don't want to see you get that anymore. I don't want to see your kids have to sit there and go into those dangerous places and do it anymore. I get that you love doing your job. Nobody wants to take that away from you. That love of being able to do something constructive. I get it. I fully get that. It's just that we want to sit here and give you something that you can do that will be safer, that will be better for the world, that will be a new, coal was once a new energy source. Gasoline, propane, natural gas, all of them were new energy sources at some point, and they erased old ideas and old ways of doing things because it made other new things possible. This is the next transition, is to make new things possible, because we're going to be able to create a new type of society, and we're in that transition period where we need to do it. And it will be better for the earth because we won't be breathing in all these toxic fumes anymore. We won't be sitting here and having our air and our water. Another reason is probably the most extreme reason, and I know the state of Pennsylvania deals with this a lot more than we do, you know, as well, and some other states are dealing with this, but he's for banning fracking. And fracking is probably the dirtiest, nastiest, most polluting causing type of energy extraction you'll ever find. You know, and all you have to have ever done is seen the documentary Gasland, and you will get exactly why fracking is a bad thing. Gasland wasn't some big Hollywood studio movie with a ton of special effects. That wasn't it. This was real people in their lives. Farms where the land is so polluted and the water so polluted that it's unusable. You can never use it again. Because it's going to make you sick. It is making people sick. You know, I don't think anybody wants our farmers, to end up dead because they have cancer. You know, and yes, we all have to die someday, myself included. But I don't think anybody wants it to be something horrible that happens to another person. I don't think that's the kind of society we really want. You know, another thing is I know Bernie Sanders will invest more into science. He will invest more into medical research so that we find cures for cancer and heart disease and diabetes and epilepsy and Alzheimer's and so many other diseases. And pardon my PC fan, but I'm not reshooting the whole video. So, and then my final point is for ending the big monopolies. He is for busting up the big banks, insurance companies, to where they can't be all one giant conglomerate of company. Right now we have a thing called illusion of choice, where we have 6 corporations and 11 banks, and they control 97% of the trade in the entire world. Now, and I know people think, wow, how is that possible? It is. There are 11 principal corporations, or 6 principal corporations and 11 banks that control most of everything that's going on in this world. And it's not right. Why should so few get access to so much and so many get access to so little? Now look, I'm not anti-capitalism at all. I think, capitalism does good things. When it comes to buying my couch, I don't want the government doing it. When it comes to buying my computer, I don't want the government doing it. But I am not for unregulated capitalism where you say, okay, there are no rules and I can cheat you and you can cheat me and screw everybody over in this process. It ends up nobody gets anything because nothing ever works. This webcam, if there were no rules on size, on quality, if there were no standards to manufacturing, this webcam wouldn't work and I couldn't make this video. Some of those standards have to come from governments. Just a reality. They set those standards, and that's us, the people, using our voice to say you will have a standard. When it comes to your pillows, when it comes to your food, there have to be standards that have to be met. Otherwise it's not safe. You're getting stuff that doesn't work and people are saying, oh, well, so what? Buyer beware. But that's the problem. If everything you buy is a piece of crap that never works or falls apart, then guess what? You have nothing at all. Because now you have no money and nothing to show for it on top of whatever you spent. You spend out $25, $30, you expect to get something that works. you spend out 50 or 60 bucks for a new microphone, or even $100 or $150 for a new microphone, you're going to expect the microphone to work, right? You take away the regulations, that microphone may not work, because what's their motivation to make it work? They can sit here and send you a box of parts. Here, jackass, try and see if you can put that together and make a microphone. Nothing to stop them. That's unregulated. I'm for regulation, because there are things that we have to keep a standard on. If you want to have nice things, you have to have a standard that's met. And that's the main thing. He is for those standards. He is for enforcing those standards and for breaking all this monopoly crap up, because monopolies are against our very way of life. They're against the law in this country. Have been for 100 years at least. I think it even goes into the Constitution, but I'm not entirely sure. You'll have to look that up. But the last time we had a monopoly issue, it was Ma Bell. It was the phone company. And what do we have now? We have T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T and other companies that are out there, because we created competition by breaking up the phone company. So it couldn't be just one phone company. Couldn't be just one electric company or one gas company or one, we took the utilities and we said, no, you're not going to sit here and charge astronomical rates. You're going to get broken up, and we're going to sit there and say, no, you can't do that anymore. We need to do that now with some of these huge corporations, and especially with the biggest banks, because these banks often own the corporations. That's, I found out recently, I think it's Bank of America owns a huge stake in BP and British Petroleum. Your BP gas stations, they own a huge stake in that. Huge stake. Why? Why should they be in the business as a bank of now making profit through a capitalistic enterprise? They're a bank. They're supposed to be there as a savings bank for you to have a chance to sit there and have a decent retirement. They are there for you, so this way you can help keep track of your finances. That's the purpose of a bank. But when a bank is serving other purposes and they're investing in other entities without your permission, without your consent, and it's your money, I would hope that you'd be pissed off and say, no, this isn't right. This isn't right when, you may have Wells Fargo who could be in bed with Lockheed Martin. You could have Nike, you have Nike and they own, they're owned by Pepsi. Pepsi also owns KFC and Taco Bell. They also own a ton of other things. Check it out, if you aren't aware. But anyway, that's everything that I have, that's pretty much everything I have to say on the matter. Just please do a lot of research and look it all up yourself too. You feel free to fact check me. You can feel free to say, hey, look, you didn't mention this or you didn't mention that. Okay, but understand, part of the reason I wanted to create this was to be a conversation starter, not to be an end-all be-all. So, I'm not going to sit here and go through every last detail and everything else, but I'm speaking now for 35 minutes, and I know this probably won't get viewed by 10 people, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you understood where I'm coming from, and I will speak with you guys very, very soon.